Last week, we were looking at the decline of the northern kingdom. Almost at its inception, it was declining, starting with Jeroboam setting up false places to worship, sliding into idolatry, and then ending up with Ahab and Jezebel, who are described as the most evil king and queen yet. So into this, Elijah is sent to give light to the world. Do you think you can find those email? Okay. Anyway, all right. So some background information on Ahab. We have 1 Kings 16, 29 through 33. If you do have comments or questions, since I can't see any of you, go ahead and just chime in. You know, I'm fine with that and like discussion. But 1 Kings 16, 29 through 33, in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab the son of Omri began to reign over Israel. And Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel and Samaria 22 years. And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria, and Ahab made an Ashrae. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. So Martin asks us to list the ways in which Ahab does more evil in the eyes of the Lord than the kings before him. And I'm sure that your list probably included took a Sidonian king's daughter for a wife, built a house for Baal in Samaria, built an Ashrae, and then worshiped these idols. And in 1 Kings 16, 25, it states that Omri, his father, did more evil than the kings before him. So his Ahab does even more evil than his father, who had surpassed the others. And it was calling to mind that verse in Mark 9:42 and Matthew 18:6 about that Jesus says, "Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea." Ahab's father had influenced him in such a bad way. Martin asks then, and I'm asking you, how then, knowing the influence that we can have on children and how we can prepare the path to the Lord for our children and grandchildren, and I'll add other children that are in our sphere of influence. So how can we prepare the path for the Lord for our children and other children in our lives?
Be good examples for them, and make sure that they are taught what is right.
That's good.
And Deuteronomy chapter 6, and these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise.
Right. So making it a part of the daily life, not separate teaching, just part of what we do in the given day. That's a good one.
I would say showing the comparison and contrastness, I guess, of living in the world versus living in Christ, and making sure, you know, that they understand the difference between those two ways of life.
And I think all those things are excellent. Another thing I think we can do is have devotionals with them from the time that they're very young. And I actually remember asking, when I was expecting Evan, asking people who had grown up in the church, because I hadn't what their parents had done to keep them faithful. And one of the things that actually Clay had said was that he saw his parents reading Bible on their own on a regular basis. And that's back to Holly's talking about being a good example, but, just encouraging them at a young age to read with you and to have devotionals with them. Any other comments
This is
on
Lori.
that?
This is Lori. I was going to say something that just struck me fairly recently, maybe about 6 months ago or so, was that I tend to read the Bible on my phone. But then I thought, but Karis doesn't know if I'm looking at Facebook or reading the Bible. So I kind of have made it more of an effort to actually get my physical Bible out. Just because I always saw my mom read the Bible,
That's a
and
good,
that just kind of struck me.
yeah, that's a good thing to remember, to think of. Yeah, those are all good. And we need to constantly remember that, little ears and medium-sized ears and big ears hear what we say and see what we do. So getting back to Ahab, he had a lot of political and economic successes. And she went over some of them. We're not going to read those verses, but you see in 1 Kings 20 that he defeated the Syrians in battle twice. We'll actually, I'm guessing, go into that more later, but that is, that's winning those battles is a sign of his success. And then 1 Kings 20:34, he got cities back from Syria and got to trade and sell in Damascus again. The Syrians were able to trade in Samaria for a while because of their dominance, but in this case, he got to go back to trading and selling in Damascus. 1 Kings 22:39 says he built an ivory house, which I just don't even want to think about the number of elephants that would have been. And that he built some cities. In 2 Kings 3:4, it states he got tribute from Moab and 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. And in 2 Kings 8:16-18, his political successes that his daughter married Jehoram, king of Judah, thus helping to reestablish a relationship with the southern kingdom. So that's definitely a political move. And then Casandra Martin talks about contrasting that with this verse, Matthew 23:27. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So she asks, what parallel do you see between Ahab's palace and Jesus's words?
All of Ahab's successes were political and, were all outward things and not spiritual things, obviously, because we know he did evil on the side of the Lord. So it was spiritual decline all the way. But from a worldly perspective, he was successful in every way.
Mm-hmm.
But not according to God and not according to what really matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And having read about Elijah and Elisha recently, just in my reading, there are little hints that he's not totally happy with himself and with the way things are going spiritually, but most of it is, pure evil. So our society is falling into some of those same traps. It's not hard to look to see the parallel between this verse and our society. Martin asks on page 21, if you want to see what you wrote, what responsibility does being a Christian in a society focused on the external lay on your heart? Well, I think we need to be pointing out the transient nature of the things on earth, our goods and our houses and our cars, and to help people see what's really important, and direct them to God. Does anybody have anything else on that?
It was funny, the other day I had one of my students. So I have a student who's, I'm not sure what country he's from, but he speaks Arabic. And I think he's from a pretty wealthy family, and he's in second grade. So, second graders haven't learned social graces yet. And he was kind of bragging. Well, he was bragging. He was saying that his dad was rich and owns several businesses, and he wanted to know how much my car costs.
No.
I said, I don't know, but it's like 16 years old. I'm sure your car costs more, and everything, but he was kind of bragging about it. But I was just, saying, it's really like what's inside a person that matters. I said something like that, but I think, I don't know. It's just funny, but just made me think of that, that just, focusing on what is inside a person, and not valuing people to, more based on like wealth or influence, or, just how we treat them, like treat everyone with respect and kindness, I think is important.
That's good. So then moving on to Jezebel. I know some of this is repeating of what Greg said, and some of it, it's from the lesson, but, we still use the phrase, she's a real Jezebel. I don't use that often, but I mean, you can hear it. She's a real Jezebel. And we all know that that means that she's really wicked. And so the Free Dictionary said that a Jezebel was a woman who is regarded as evil and scheming. And so I'm sure that if when you looked it up, you found something very similar. So her father was Baal, which meant with Baal. He was a priest of Baal, and Greg mentioned that her role as a queen would have been a priestess of Baal as well. And this was a political alliance, this marriage with the king of Sidon's daughter. As I was saying, they had been fighting with the Syrians for a while, and so if he made the alliance with the Phoenicians, it would give him more military support. So I was looking on a map where this is, and if you go straight north from Samaria and Galilee and follow the coast, Sidon is right on the coast in current day Lebanon, the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, but it's north of Israel and slightly east as the land goes east. And then Syria would be opposite it to the west. So having the Phoenicians help him in his battles is it was a smart military move, just a bad spiritual move. And I was reading that people who worship Baal, so including Jezebel coming into it, didn't care if people were worshiping Yahweh or not, because the Baal worship is pantheistic. Baal is just one of the gods. And so that it didn't bother them, it didn't bother her that people in the country would be worshiping Yahweh. They just included him into their list of gods. Of course, it bothers Yahweh that they would be worshiping Baal. Those high places of worship, which were placed in the wrong places by Jeroboam in Bethel and Dan, were on the outer edges of the northern kingdom. But the central part where Samaria was all, of course, dedicated to the worship of Baal with this royal couple. 1 Kings 21:25 talks about her influence. There was none who sold himself to do what was evil in the sight of the Lord like Ahab, whom Jezebel, his wife, incited. So you can see that her influence was a lot. And so we need to think about the influence that, if we're married, the influence that we have on our husbands, and the influence that we have as Christians on anyone around us. Okay, so the religion itself, as we're looking at this, Martin exhorts us to see sin like God does, which I think comes up a little bit more when we see his reaction to some of this. So we already read what Ahab and Jezebel had been doing in 1 Kings 16:31 by building the house for Baal, building the altar, building a pillar, and building the Ashrae. But before that, in Deuteronomy 7:1-6, which we're not going to read, God had told them two major points, and this was before they entered the promised land. So this was a long time earlier than this, where Ahab and Jezebel are. But he had told them to totally destroy all of the Canaanite gods. Now, why do you think he wanted them to totally destroy all of them? Not keep them for art or even, even.
Because of the temptation to fall back into idolatry, because they had been worshiping idols before God took them out of Egypt. And again, they fell into it in the desert with the golden calf. So, obviously there was that tendency there to return to idols. And if the idols were there among them, it'd be easy to turn back to it. And of course, any influence from, the peoples, that's also why they were forbidden to marry.
Right. Yeah, which is the second point, told not to intermarry. And then the question, and you're kind of alluding to it, why is it imperative that they shouldn't marry people who worship false gods? You want to go ahead and tackle that one, Gretchen?
I wasn't even looking at my book. But, women especially have a huge spiritual influence on their husbands. And I think that's, part of why God, prohibited it, was because those women that the Israelites wanted to marry from other places would bring their idols with them. They would bring their worship, their things, and, they would be the negative influence and pull them in that direction.
Yes, and it made me think, I know that people can marry non-Christians and convert them to Christianity. I know that this happens, and I'm grateful and thankful that that does happen. But I also know people who marry non-Christians and have fallen away. And that is, a very sad thing, and something that, we, as we're making choices about whom to marry, that's something that, we need to consider carefully, because they're going to influence us, and we're going to influence them, and we want it to be a positive influence. Let's see, I'm looking where I am here. Oh yeah. Okay. So God warned them, and this is her words, about the insidious nature of evil and how it can quickly capture the hearts of any who tolerate or accept its practice. Then she shifts to us, and she asks, in what ways are Christians a people holy to the Lord? In what ways are we holy to the Lord?
I think one way is that we've been chosen and set aside to be his. Those that choose to follow Christ are chosen. And so we're his people.
Mm-hmm. And I think we're also set apart by the things that, we have been talking about we're set apart by the way we live and by the way that we think and the way that we worship. And those things should all be very different from the world around us. She admonishes us to keep our focus. On page 23, she said, God knows our hearts. He knows that we struggle to keep our focus only on him. We must rid ourselves of anything that would pull our attention away from the Lord. So she was talking, they were tempted by the idolatry around them and fell into it. We need to make sure that we're not pulled into the idolatry and other evil things around us. So we have to keep our focus. A little bit more about Baal. You probably read all this. He's the chief god of the gods of the Canaanites. His name means Lord, which of course means master. He's considered to be the ruler of heaven and earth. He's recognized as the god of weather, controls the rain, said to ride the storm clouds as his chariot and speak through the sound of thunder. And she asks us to read Psalm 97, 1-7, which we're going to do. And I thought that was very interesting how David is surrounded by his country, is surrounded by people who were idolatrous. And his reaction to it as in staying focused on the Lord is so different than Ahab's. And here's his. Psalm 97, verses 1-7. The Lord reigns. Let the earth rejoice. Let the many coastlands be glad. Clouds and thick darkness are all around him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. Fire goes before him and burns up his adversaries all around. His lightnings light up the world. The earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax before the Lord of all the earth. The heavens proclaim his righteousness, and all the people see his glory. All worshipers of images are put to shame, who make their boast in worthless idols. Worship him, all you gods. So I know I got a new appreciation from that psalm, and I'm guessing you did too. The Ashrae is the female counterpart of Baal. She's the goddess of the evening star, and her symbol is an upright piece of wood with images of the goddess herself carved on it. So the Ashrae poles were placed next to Baal's altar to forge a powerful image of fertility. And then their sexual union was said to bring fertility and abundance into the land. So we've already talked about Ahab having built a huge temple for Baal. It was large enough to hold many worshipers, and we see just how many worshipers there are in some other passages later on. And we can assume that it was opulent because part of making a home for a god is making it very beautiful and expensive because that's considered to be an act of worship to that god. And I think of Solomon's temple and all the splendor of it. It was, he wanted it to be beautiful for God. And it was filled with golden dishes for service. The worship was conducted outdoors, excuse me, on high places, and the sacrifices were brought there. And she gave us some verses that showed the Israelites' participation in Baal worship. So 1 Kings 14:23 talks about they're building high places, building pillars, ashram, and that they had cult prostitutes. 1 Kings 18:28 talks about their crying aloud and cutting themselves. So, the shedding of blood there. 2 Kings 10:22-24, they had special clothing for worshipers and they offered burnt offerings. 2 Kings 17, they made 2 metal calves. Ashrae was worshipped. Baal was served, and children were offered up as an offering. And there was the use of divination. 2 Kings 23, they had male cult prostitutes and women weaving hangings for Ashrae. And Jeremiah 11:13 talks about altars being set up. And Hosea 2:8 talks about the grain, wine, oil, silver, and gold used for Baal worship. So it was very clear that the Israelites were enmeshed in this Baal worship. She talks about the primary focus on Baal worship is the ritual prostitution. So they had male and female prostitutes, and since they believed that the union between Baal and Ashrae was the reason that the land was so fertile, they thought the imitation of that act was a form of worship. And so, as Martin says, sexual perversion becomes an act of adoration. And also integral to it was the sacrifice of children by fire. Jeremiah 19:5, and they have built the high places of Baal to burn their sons in the fire as burnt offerings to Baal, which I did not command or decree, nor did it come into my mind. I don't even want to imagine that. But it happened. An archaeologist excavated a large temple site dedicated to worship of the Ashrae at Megiddo near Samaria, and they found ruins in the layers of dirt that went back to the time of Ahab. And then there was a cemetery nearby that held lots of jars of skeletons of babies that had been sacrificed in Baal worship. And I love it that we have God's reaction to it in the scriptures. I think this Jeremiah verse, for one thing, is his reaction, but you'll see some very strong wording in the next passage, Jeremiah 2:11-13. Has a nation changed its gods, even though they are no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which does not profit. Be appalled, O heavens, at this. Be shocked, be utterly desolate, declares the Lord. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. I think those are strong words: appalled, shocked, utterly desolate. Just shows that how sad this made God that they were doing these things. We don't have to look far to find parallels in our society and theirs. And so, but Martin states, it is into this darkness that God called his people to shine as light, to be pure and blameless children of God. And we're supposed to be radically different as we're called to holiness. And this next portion is the verse between Ahab and his atrocities and the first glimpse of Elijah. Now, Greg talked about this. He had a slight difference in what he thought it meant, but it comes out the same either way. In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of Abiram, his firstborn, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua, the son of Nun. And I thought it was interesting that, and we'll look at the Joshua verse in a second, but I thought it was interesting that we have the names of these children, almost to remind us, that these are real people. These were real children. I mean, and of course we know that, but it's just I just thought it was an emphasis on that by giving their names. It just makes it more real. Joshua 6:26, about 500 years earlier, Joshua laid an oath on them at that time, saying, "Cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds his city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation, and at the cost of his youngest son shall he set up its gates. I don't need to tell you about the Battle of Jericho. Now, Greg was saying that he thought that Hiel was personally offering up his sons as sacrifices, and of course that may be. Martin was talking more as it was a fulfillment of this curse that Joshua laid there. But I was thinking either way, Hiel's cursed. He's cursed by this as a reaction to this, or he's cursed because he's worshiping Baal in the first place and offering up sacrifices. But anyway, I like how Martin is talking about how it is a reminder of God's faithfulness. It reminds us as we're reading through it of his faithfulness. And I don't know if Ahab was aware of it or not, but it could have reminded whoever was around of God's faithfulness, because certainly some people saw it and would have remembered, hopefully, Joshua's curse. And she talks about that some people have strayed so far, and she's talking about these people in Israel. They may have strayed so far that they just thought it was ancient words from an ancient God. And that struck me because, of course, today people think of it as ancient words from an ancient God that, in fact, some believers, that people who would say they believe in Jesus don't believe that every thing in the Bible is accurate. So we know that there are people who view the word of God as lifeless, and that God is not working in our lives today. We know people think that, but we also know that God has power for us today, and that he was faithful then and he was faithful now. And she inserted a few verses, just a few, of God's faithfulness. And so in Deuteronomy 7:9, it talks about his being a faithful God, and that he keeps his covenant and his steadfast love to us. And then Psalm 145:13 promises an everlasting kingdom. And 1 Corinthians 1:9, he mentions his faithfulness in keeping his fellowship with us through Jesus. And I know there are many, many other examples of verses of his faithfulness. And she also mentions that his timing is perfect. And she had, her thinking that was a reminder to the people that God keeps his promises. His timing is perfect. And she says on page 28, God's timing is perfect. Even in our darkest moments, we can be sure of God's faithfulness to his promises. Does anybody have any comments or anything they want to add? Okay, enter Elijah. So we've already discussed that we don't have a lot of background information about him. We know he's a Tishbite from Tishbe. We do know that he was loyal to God. The first things, I did kind of wonder how he got an audience with Ahab, but we don't know, so we don't need to know. Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." I'm going to read this summary of what Martin said Samaria was like as Ahab is coming in his belt of leather and his garment of hair. This is on page 28. As Elijah strides into the presence of King Ahab, we must take a moment to look at his surroundings. Ahab lives in Samaria, a city on a hill surrounded by fertile and fruitful fields. This seat of government is recognized as a world power, and its inhabitants continue to grow wealthy from the trade that flows through the land. Remember that Ahab lives in an ivory palace surrounded by every luxury. Wealth and ease have made him feel self-sufficient and powerful. As we will soon see, 850 prophets of Baal and Ashrae are assuring Ahab that all is well because of Baal's great blessings. And then Elijah comes in and talks to him. in that environment. He tells Ahab that there's going to be a drought. It's coming to this land of milk and honey, where they worship a god of weather. So it probably seemed a bit unlikely to them. But we know God is faithful. And she gave us these verses to look at. Deuteronomy 11, 10 through 17. For the land that you are entering to take possession of, it is not like the land of Egypt, from which you have come, where you sowed your seed and irrigated it like a garden of vegetables. But the land that you are going over to possess is a land of hills and valleys, which drinks water by the rain from heaven, a land that the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are always upon it, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, he will give the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the later rain, that you may gather in your grain and your wine and your oil, and he will give grass in your fields for your livestock, and you shall eat and be full. So the implication there, of course, is if you do obey God, he will give you the rain. So by implication, we can get, if you don't obey God, you won't get the rain. And that's, he keeps his promises of blessings and he keeps his promises of punishment. And Elijah was praying for that. And we're going to talk about more about that in a minute. But Martin asked the question, how does the drought show God's love for the people of Israel?
If they follow him, he will take care of them.
Mm-hmm. And it's a reminder, I mean, it's a promise to them that that's going to happen. And if, yes, but the drought, right, if they follow him and go back to him, he'll take care of them and the land will be healed. And they'll be blessed. It's, I don't know. Anyway, I'll move on. But so Elijah's first words, and I really did like that her explanation of all of this. His first words were, oh, sorry, whoops, I missed part of that. Deuteronomy, didn't I? Take care lest your heart be deceived and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you and he will shut up the heavens, there we go, so that there will be no rain and the land will yield no fruit and you will perish quickly off the good land that the Lord is giving you. I'm sorry about that. Here are Elijah's first word, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives. And she talks about three important truths. And the first truth was the word Lord. And as you know, that is a substitution for whatever, well, for however they pronounced what we use, the word Yahweh or Jehovah. And you've heard that explanation, I'm sure. But he's using the covenant name of the Lord with them. And by doing so, he's reminding Ahab of that covenant, of the special relationship between God and Israel, and then the special blessings that come as a result of that, the commandments and things they have to do, and the curses that are in that relationship if they don't obey. And Ahab needs to remember these. The second truth is Yahweh is the God of Israel. So Ahab is promoting and participating in the worship of Baal, a different God. And Elijah, in these few words, is reminding him that God alone is the God over Israel. And the truth, did somebody say something? Okay. The third truth is that God lives. And Ahab has forgotten this. And nonetheless, God works and moves and seeks the heart of his children. So putting those three truths in perspective for us then, what is the covenant name? What name seals the covenant that binds us to the Lord?
The
Wow.
name of Jesus.
Go ahead.
The name of Jesus.
Yes, that's the covenant name. It's the name that seals the covenant that binds us to God the Father. And then the second one, Yahweh is the God of Israel. Yahweh is our God. And so what does this mean for us? It means everything for us. We need to follow him. We need to remember that we need to obey him, and we need to love him, and that he loves us. And then we need to remember our God is alive. And she asked, and I do think it's an important question, why is it important for us to remember that God is alive, and how does that change the way we approach him? Well, it goes back to that ancient words, ancient God. If you don't think God is alive, then you don't have a need to follow him. And we need to remind ourselves that he is alive, so that we live in love and obedience to him.
I think also reminding that he's active in our lives,
Yes.
that he impacts our lives all the time. Even the fact that we're alive. So
Good point. Okay. The next thing he says, the God whom I serve. It's obvious whom Elijah serves. And it's literally translated, before whom I stand. Well, he is standing before the king, but he's reminding King Ahab that they both are called to a higher authority. He serves God, not Ahab, and that Ahab needs to serve God also. And then it should be obvious to others, if they spend any time with us, whom we serve by our lives, like Elijah's life. He goes on to say, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word. Luke 4:25 tells us that the drought plagued Israel for 3 years and 6 months. And so it's a direct challenge to this God who is supposed to be the God of weather. And the land's not going to be producing, even though their God is supposed to be a God of fertility. And so with this challenge, God is trying to reach the hearts of those who have traded his glory for idols. And so that's, and Elijah prayed for this. And it talks about how Elijah's heart was so pure, and that he was a man of God and of prayer. So Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed fervently that it might not rain. And for 3 years and 6 months, it did not rain on the earth. Then he prayed again, and heaven gave rain, and the earth bore its fruit. So Elijah, fervent prayer, it doesn't seem like it was a one-time request made in one sentence. He felt strongly. He was very sad about the idolatry in the land, and he felt strongly that he wanted them to turn back to God. And I'm sure that that's what he was trying to do with this request. And Martin then turns that to asking if we've ever asked God to do whatever is necessary to refine our hearts, even if it means going through a season of pain. And I don't expect us to answer that or talk about that here, but it is a good, thing to think about. How willing am I to change? Am I willing to go through whatever it takes to be what God wants me to be? And she goes on to talk about this verse from Jesus. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. And she talks about, what you have to cut off the dead plant parts so that the new can grow. And that can be painful for us to go through difficult situations, but the growth that can come from that and the reliance on God that can come from that is, those are blessings. And somebody mentioned earlier, if we turn back to him, he'll take care of us. So she has a quote on page 33. We may not understand in that instant how God can use our difficult, dark moments to shape us for his glory. But use them, he will, if we place our lives fully in the hands of the gardener. All he calls us to do is to hang on for dear life to the vine. Does anybody have any other questions or comments or things they want to talk about before we close?
I was just thinking as I was reading this about how, one thing to think about God using hard times that we've experienced to help us grow, but to actually ask,
Yeah.
for those if we need them, that's a little harder to do for me.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your comments. And I'm sorry about all of the technical difficulties. I'm going to close with a passage that she had used earlier in the lessons, but it touched on so many of the elements here in tonight's lessons that I went ahead and I'm just going to put it here. And then that's how we're going to close tonight. Ephesians 5, verses 1 through 10. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure, or who is covetous, that is, an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not become partners with them, for at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord.